Good morning. We are here today because we need Premier Doug Ford and Minister Stephen Lecce to take action on stopping violence in schools. Parents, grandparents, caregivers, do you know what's happening in your child's school? Classrooms are being evacuated, students sitting soiled in their own feces, staff injured daily, black eyes, concussions, bite marks. Principals and teachers are scrambling for resources. Who's losing out in all of this? Our children. Meanwhile, the government blames parents and educators, never once taking responsibility for their own actions. Continuing to underfund education supports for the most vulnerable of our society, our children. As education workers, as frontline staff, we say the increase in violence is not because educators and parents don't care about kids. It's because the government hasn't invested in increasing the boots on the ground, educators in front of kids. Of the $24 million the Ministry of Education provided to help reduce the risk of violence in schools and promote safety of students and educators, only $4 million in funding was allocated to educational assistance to meet the needs of over 2 million students across Ontario. $2 per student is not enough. That's the price of a small coffee. That's what the Ministry of Education thinks your child is worth. The Premier and the Minister of Education can't deny the crisis within our classrooms, yet they continue to sidestep the issue. We demand that Doug Ford and Stephen Lecce increase the number of education support workers in classrooms across Ontario now. Thank you.
20 years ago, I became an educational assistant. I wanted to help children with disabilities have the same opportunities as their peers. I worked with one student. I helped them to read, do math, and learn life skills. It was amazing to see their excitement when they figured out how to add two numbers together or speak and be understood. Fast forward 10 years to my first real injury. A student injured my hip so bad I couldn't pick up my two small children. My daughter kissed me and said, "Boo-boo all better?" How do you explain to a 3-year-old that a kiss doesn't always make the boo-boo go away? Over the next 3 years, student aggression re-injured my hip 5 more times. Then, in 2018, a student attacked me. They held my clothes with one hand and punched and kicked me. It took 3 other staff members to get them off me. I ended up needing time off for my injuries, and I was scared to go back to work. This is when I started therapy for PTSD. My therapist was concerned for my well-being and wanted me to take more time off. I couldn't. I knew my students needed me and that my coworkers were picking up the pieces as there weren't supplies to fill the job. To parents, the phrase purple unicorn means nothing. To my students, it's the code word I use to evacuate the classroom for their safety. Parents don't know that their children are witnessing this. I worked in a kindergarten class and those children saw feces and metal water bottles being thrown at me. They saw me being hit, kicked, and bitten. I know how long it took me to deal with that. How do we expect 4- and 5-year-old brains to process it? 20 years ago, I worked with one child. Educational assistants now help 4 to 8 children at a time. Children's needs are not being met. I'm constantly dealing with violent behaviors instead of helping students with their academics. I walk through the halls with full body protection, arm guards, leg guards, chest, and head protection. Last year, after a year and a half of practicing, my student learned how to jump properly. It was such an exciting day for them, me, and their parents. Those are the moments I live for. Sadly, because of understaffing, those moments don't happen often. Premier Ford and Minister Lecce need to provide more funding to hire more support for our most vulnerable students. Thank you for listening.
As a student in Hamilton, I have witnessed and experienced violence in many forms. I have seen students get into fights and staff members abused. I've had my legs kicked out from under me. I've been punched in the stomach, stabbed with a pencil, and hit in the eye with a marker, all before the age of grade 6. And yet, in none of those cases were my parents told. I had to be the one to tell them. I suffered through elementary school, feeling like no one was able to protect me from my own classmates. It affected my learning. I felt too anxious to concentrate. At that time, there wasn't enough educational assistance available for me to get support during school hours. But with their help, I was able to turn myself towards a brighter future and eventually be here today. Without the EAs that fought for me, I wouldn't be able to fight to get support for everyone who is in my situation. And so, I asked the Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, to prove that you were actually for the students of Ontario. Stop normalizing violence in our classrooms. Thank you.
Hi. As a parent of one neurodivergent and two neurotypical teens, it has been my experience that we are not informed that their classrooms have been evacuated or their education has been interrupted. We are not told about the verbal and physical attacks that our children have repeatedly witnessed. Not once has an opportunity for crisis support for students been offered for witnessing repeated violence in their schools. As it is with many boards, it's up to the principal's discretion that parents are told. Often it's only direct victims' parents that are required to be informed if it is against a student. This does not happen when they witness violence against staff. This creates an environment that is tainted with normalized violence and trauma that is never addressed. This gives a false impression that it is okay to be verbally attacked by obscenities, threats of harm to the family members of staff or students, and then physical violent attacks that range from slaps and punches right up to brain injuries. Violence has no place in schools. It should not be accepted in any form. All students have a right to education. It's not just students that are identified that are acting out. There's been a significant spike of violent acts across elementary and secondary school environments. Even in kindergarten, all students have a right to go to school and feel safe. Parents, you need to get loud and speak for the end of the normalization of violence in our classrooms. Be that parent. Speak to your kids. Ask those questions. Let your elected school officials know that it's not being reported. Let your elected MPP know. It's traumatizing to all students when violence happens in an environment that is expected to be safe. Parents need to partner with educators to send a united message to the Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, and the Premier Doug Ford. Stop normalizing violence in our schools.
Good morning. Thank you so much to the brave COPE members and parents and students who have shared your stories this morning. Sadly, these stories are not unique. I hear similar stories every day from education workers, administrators, parents, and students across the province. Violence in schools in Ontario is at crisis levels. Classrooms are being evacuated daily. Teachers and education workers are being injured on the job. Workers are being given Kevlar to wear in the classroom. And workers and students are being told they need to get better at dodging. The mental health of our kids is suffering, but the resources aren't there to support them in our schools. Large class sizes and a lack of educational support staff mean kids aren't getting the help and attention they need, and that leads to frustration. There isn't enough funding to support children with special education needs or behavioral issues. As education critic for the official opposition, I have asked this government multiple times to stop delivering empty talking points and instead start delivering real action on these issues. Instead, we see Doug Ford and Stephen Lecce sidestepping these issues at every level. Education workers should not have to put their bodies on the line every day. They should not have to go to work in protective gear more appropriate for a war zone. They should not have to beg for funding that would help support students properly and lessen the frequency of violence in our schools. The minister likes to talk all the time about back to basics, but at what point will he acknowledge that children deserve a safe environment to learn? That seems pretty basic to me. We need to properly address this epidemic of violence in our schools with mental health resources, additional staff, and training on safe intervention and de-escalation. We need the government to start working collaboratively and respectfully with teachers and education workers instead of constantly undermining them and disrespecting them. That is why I am proud to stand alongside members of COPE 527, parents and students today to call for meaningful action by this government to finally address this issue. And I'll turn it back over to Susan.
So I'd just like to thank everybody for being here today, and if there's any questions, we're more than happy to answer any. Thank you again. Have a great day.